Yeah.
Richard?
Well, I was just going to point out that, again, that we are a long ways down the road of developing this transportation plan. And any particularly non-substantive changes that we make are going to make it that much more difficult to get past the timeframes that we need to. But I think with regard to the response times, one of the real weaknesses is that none of the IFTs that we are discussing have any response time standards, unless I'm misreading that. And I think that speaks to the issue of particularly these critical transports. If there's no response time standard to hold a contractor to, I think that argues in favor of leaving the system the way it is, where the doctors have the choice.
It's the same as we had in the last 10 years. As far as I'm concerned.
Well, let's clarify that, because you just made a statement that this is the same as we've had in the last 10 years. That is not accurate, and that's our whole issue here. No, the document you have that you're proposed extracting the ALS from the interfacility on line 2, that's the whole issue. And Mountain Lifeline wants to go on record of saying we're standing for patient care. And if there are patients that are in that hospital that need immediate transport and they can't fly for whatever reason, and the current provider is called and they can't get there in a timely fashion per the doctor should have that option to call someone else. And that's what's happened the last 10 years. But under this new agreement, under this what you're proposing here, we believe you're tying the doctor's hands and saying he can only call Sims. Mr. Smith stood up here when you asked him, is that true? Could you have taken that patient? He said, yes, we could. You didn't ask him, how much time would it take you to get there? Because somebody made a decision to call Mountain Lifeline because the timely response that they gave, the estimate, wasn't sufficient under the condition of the patient. And we just want to go on record that for every patient that sets up there, that are present 3 ambulances in this county, which is the same level that 10 years ago we declared a state of emergency because we only had 3 ambulances. Today, we're saying that's an acceptable standard. And under that standard, there are times when we have ambulances that are on their way to Reno, on the way to another call, and they can't get to the hospital in a timely manner. And in those situations, Mountain Lifeline's going on record today saying patient care is at risk. And that's the whole issue. You want to state it in any other terms, the present provider, the future provider, whatever. We're talking about those patients because it may be one of my family members or one of your family members that's at that hospital. And I want to go on the record. I'm doing everything I can to make sure that that doctor's hands aren't tied and somebody's injured because of it. And yeah, it's only 5 people. That's a lot in my book.
Thank you. In your statement, when you declared a state of emergency, there was 3 ambulances. Actually, there was none.
I've reviewed
at the point that South Lassen and Lassen turned their keys into the CHP.
South Lassen never did, sir.
South Lassen had some issues that I can't remember at the time. Can't remember today at the time, but
the record is very clear. South Lassen was not involved. It was Lassen ambulance that declined to
no, there was an issue of South Lassen too.
They had 3
I don't
ambulances.
remember exactly what it was, but I don't know if it was broke down at the time or whatever, but I'd have to go back and look, but that's not important. Anybody else have any comment? What's the pleasure of the board? If ALS was left in there, being down later on, if BLS non-emergency services is included in the EOA, I don't see.
It's non-consequential to us, if that's the case.
How would it affect whoever the current bidder, if that's the bidder?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question, but it's kind of in a couple of parts. Am I hearing it correct? And maybe there's a solution to this, I'm hoping. I'm hearing from Mountain that the BLS isn't an issue, it's inconsequential. I think those are the words.
Right.
I'm seeing an acknowledgement of also hearing that there is an issue associated with a limited number of calls. I think there was an overestimation of perhaps 5. And those are the critical care calls in the manner described by Mr. Crosby. What if just those critical care, and I'm going to look at Mr. Spees and Mr. Nair, just those were an additional excision, if you will, from the EOA. So essentially what you have is all interfacility ambulance transports, except those from the hospital to the airport for fixed wing transport, neonatal, physician staff, and critical care. I don't know.
That was our suggestion.
The assumption is that the assumption is that the successful bidder will not be able to meet the criteria to move a patient who needs that level of care in an expeditious manner. The plan says we are asking the successful bidder to tell us how they're going to meet the needs of the patient in an expeditious manner. Whatever's going on today or yesterday or the day before is a different issue. What we're saying, here's the standard. If you want a interfacility transfer and it's going by air, we know which direction you're going. If it's going to go by ground, the successful bidder needs to tell us how they're going to perform.
So when the RFP goes out, whoever puts a bid in will tell you in that, at that time, how they will respond.
That's a part of the plan.
And will they also specify response time standards?
You know, Dr. Rednick and Dr. Holmes have put together a flow sheet on interfacility transfers for the hospital to use, and it's a very simplified procedure. There's a second phase of it that they have both talked about, and that is putting together what the timeline criteria is going to be. Personally, I don't think that needs to be something in the plan or in the RFP. I think that's something that the doctor to doctor can work out.
Blue Council.
Is that even in our jurisdiction?
What's that?
When they were bringing up how the
response times?
Yeah, no, the protocol of the hospital.
Well, surely the doctor from NorCal EMS is working with the hospital. That's something that happens regularly. I mean, we would sure hope they're communicating.
Right, but I mean, that has nothing to do with what we're deciding here today.
Well, if response times are a concern that you want to, for purposes of the interfacility transfers, something you want to integrate into the EMS transportation plan, that's something that you can do. It has been made part of response times already for emergency calls, essentially, as referenced in the previous conversation by the other supervisors. I don't necessarily, well, I mean, I'm not the expert in this.
Let me see if I can address it. I think I understand Jeff's question, and it shouldn't be taken lightly. What we're doing here is creating a monopoly, a legal monopoly.
Right.
And so to the extent that we are defining who can operate in this area, and to that extent, we are potentially, denying a patient who would go somewhere else. And that, for the purpose of doing that is to create an economic environment where somebody can successfully operate. But yes, we're denying other parties the ability to operate in this area.
So in short, I think we can set out, I think we do have authority essentially to dictate,
The protocol of the hospital.
not the protocol at the hospital, no, but
Who's
response
available
times.
to respond to the hospital
Yeah.
for certain calls?
And the decision they make, or is it the board responsible, the county responsible, or the provider responsible?
I don't understand the question, Mr. Chairman.
If that situation happened where whoever gets the bid did not have a ambulance available for a ALS call, then and there was no one to take that person to.
And there was no authority under the program to call an alternative.
Right.
And something happened to that ill patient, might we be on the hook for that? Is that the question?
That's the question.
Well, I don't know the answer to that. Anybody can file anything at any time against anyone. That's where it starts. Whether they succeed or not, hard to say.
Iona,
Can I ask a question?
you bet. Come to the podium, state your name.
Thank you. Iona McCain here. In 1995, Edward had a heart attack here in this building. And Tina Love was with him, and they took him over here to the St. Mary's Hospital. I got called, and I could not move him out of the hospital. So I don't know what happened, but it was stated that me as a person, I couldn't do anything, so the hospital was to make a decision. He was unconscious. And I didn't know what to do. And I was able to call the Chico myself, get a hold of the people in Chico, my brother-in-law, who's chief staff remote. He says, we got the staff, we got the acute care, you tell them to get them down there. And my point is, sometimes that communication is not there. The hospital makes it. And I'm just saying, that's what happened to me. And Tina Love was a person who had nursing experience, but she was a legal assistant. And for about 2 or 3 hours, then it was stated I could make a decision because I was correct, but I made a decision of get somebody in here and get them out of here as fast as you can. But I had to argue with the hospital people who were making that decision. And to this day, I don't know who it was that was trying to hold me up. I don't know if it was the doctor or it was the administration, but with Tina Love's help, I was able to get him out of here and get him to Chico. So I'm just simply saying some of the things about your communication that you're talking about.
And I would hope, 20 years ago we advanced in that, thing.
Well, it could still be an obstacle because you're basically stating who is making the decision about the call, about how you transport people, ambulance, or whatever it was. I was just trying to bring up experience that was turned out successful.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
But who does it?
Pleasure to order. Anybody else have questions, suggestions?
Let me ask one question. On page 13, we're taking out the ALS as the inter-facility ambulance transport. Explain that one to me one more time.
Okay. So,
Because
I thought I
let me ask
understood
a
it.
question too, this go along with it, Richard. We're taking out ALS and then adding number 3, basic loan life support. So aren't we addressing that twice? Either one on their own would do that.
right. Number 2, where it says ALS interfacility and the ALS is blanked out. The last draft had included ALS transfers.
Correct.
So the idea was by deleting ALS, then, interestingly, by deleting it, that includes ALS and every other interfacility
Correct.
transfer.
If it's not taken out, then it's in there.
It's, yeah.
You're
And,
fixed to just that.
right, as opposed to just ALS, it would be ALS, BLS, critical care.
That's how I interpret it now. I guess maybe where I'm getting confused in just listening to the discussions. I mean, you think you have it figured out until the next question. And then Bob Burns answers it, and it becomes very confusing.
I figure these are lawyers. Lawyers do that. They confuse you so you don't know what you're doing.
Exactly.
No offense to the judge.
And if he needs help, I'm sure Eugene will help him out. Okay, that was, now I've lost my train of thought.
So the intention was by deleting ALS, it would then include ALS and BLS.
It becomes all inclusive.
But it also includes this critical care component that we haven't given a lot of thought to. So if it's the intention of the board to excise
Well, my concern,
critical care,
and that's my concern, is that...
I have a suggestion for doing that.
Yeah, okay, good. 'Cause my concern is that we're letting the 5 or less transport becomes the tail that wags the dog in terms of how it's interpreted. And given the fact that 10 years ago we had found the binders. I got two big binders like this here, which was the whole RFP process from 10 years ago. It had all the stuff that was incorporated. I was reviewing it. I meant to bring it and just have it for show and tell, to show you how we went from that to this. But the thing is that there was language that was left out, and as a result of that language left out, it created some sort of a carve-out that allowed some activity over here that really wasn't part of the primary activity there, which caused the successful bidder to be concerned to start the process last summer. That kind of has been cascading downhill ever since to bring us to today. So I think it's important that we try to be specific without being too specific. So by taking the ALS out, what you're doing is you may open up a much broader pertain where that 5 or less calls now becomes the tail that wags the dog. So 5 years, 10 years from now, when the next board is sitting here trying to deal with this here, all of a sudden are listening to all this cascade of discontent. You know, I just want to make sure that we don't create that if we can. So maybe everything except for those 5 patients, I mean, should be what this inter-facility allows.
So, to that end, and that's the consensus of the board, like Mr. Burns has suggested, I would suggest we delete ALS and then add as an additional exception from the EOA the critical care IFT component, which is the 5.
So the proposal that's before you today would remain exactly the same, including all of the changes on the draft, but it would also give me Christmas.
Why do
Wait a second.
you give me Christmas?
That's better than what I say when I'm not what I'm saying. But it would add as an additional carve out to the EOA critical care interfacility transports, and that would be at the end of number 2.
It would. Number 2 applies only to interfacility transfer. So it would say after and physician, staff, ambulance. It would say critical care transports.
In that last sentence in number 2, you would strike the word and after the word transports, you'd put a comma, and you'd insert and critical care transports. And then the semicolon would remain.
And that would carve out those 3 or 5 transfers a year.
Correct. From the EOA.
They would be just like they are today. They would be,
And every,
It would help it right down critical care.
and it would, and everything else would remain the same.
Okay. I guess that satisfies a little apprehension they developed listening to the draft.
And actually, it accommodates it all. It accommodates the BLS stuff that Mr. Smith advanced at the NorCal EMS meeting. It accommodates the critical care transports that Mountain's advancing this morning.
But why wouldn't dispatch call the current ground provider to take that critical care dispatch, or that critical care?
Well, if you set up the RFP in the exclusive operating area to not include those, which is what we just provided language to be able to do, then the hospital would not be obliged to call anybody in particular. They could call who they wanted. But if those critical care transports were included as part of the EOA, they would be obliged to call whoever the successful bidder was, and the successful bidder would be obliged to provide that service. And if they can't provide that service, then the hospital would have to go to whoever's left.
But the problem, as Mr. Chittick has mentioned, is that giving the exclusivity to one entity without response time standards is problematic.
Because essentially what you're doing is you're saying the hospital is obliged to call whoever the successful bidder is, but there's no guarantee how quick they're going to get it done.
Somebody give me an example of one of these critical care calls. Whether it's bad, you can't use a helicopter, you can't use an airplane, so, you know, the current provider is not available, so Mountain Wi-Fi's got to take them. Give me an example of one of these situations. Mr.
Station name, please. Brian Gray. Thank you.
Right.
Program Director.
Thank you.
Just a standard one would be, any kind of call that's going to require care above the scope of paramedic. This would be a common one would be a patient on a ventilator, a patient who's on paralytics that has to be kept basically in a chemical coma during transport and everything else, and we're breathing for them. This is a scope above paramedic. It's one of those people that's real specific, and they can't be moved. If they can't be moved by air due to weather, sometimes weight. Extremely large people, they need to go by ground.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. Any more questions by the board? You guys?
I have one question. It's actually a clarification, and I would interpret this on page 7, where
Let me catch up to you if I can.
I focused on the board being misspelled with the stutter. It says that Board of Supervisors on DDD, and there's 2 places where DDD is, and on the front of the document it is DDD for
Yes.
the date. So I assume that that's just a placeholder for whatever the date is, if this is ultimately
Yes. Yes.
adopted. Okay. I just want to make sure that I didn't want to make...
And ultimately adopted by the NorCal EMS board is the date that would be placed in there. Is that correct?
Before it goes back to the NorCal board, I'll insert the date for today's
Okay,
meeting.
thank you.
So that way,
Thank you.
then, when NorCal finishes up with their day, then.
We were going to put a chalkboard on there because of so many events that we've had here.
But I was going to say, you'd have so many strikeouts and additions, underlines, that it would probably take a whole page into itself. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would move that we...
I have one more question.
Okay.
Now, is NorCal going to pass this with this exception?
Don't ask that question, because we asked that question last time, and you know what happens.
Jinxed
Don't jinx it. Yeah. They're on their own.
My answer being on the NorCal board representative, yes.
I put another exception.
Well, we did
There's
ask...
nothing, I think both providers that are involved have had their chance to lobby this board, the NorCal board, and get direction and
We
get
asked
their
Mr.
position.
Mr.
So I think we're
Shea-
done today.
Yeah, we asked them if they had any other shoes to drop, and the answer was...
I will recommend, there will probably be a call, a conference call, trying to set it up for Friday.
Well, it's gotta make, we'll have to make changes before we can set that up.
Right, but I'm saying that that's what Kathy with NorCal is trying to set up a conference call to get the people online to vote. And my recommendation will be to support what we passed today.
So in short, there's no guarantee, but I think we can see a full court press from county administration and joining Mr. Pyle on that call as well.
Correct.
In trying to, I don't think we have the time.
I'm not
We've
saying-
exhausted any spare time. We're well beyond that.
I'm not saying it will be Friday, I'm saying we're trying to set it up for that. I think the next day would be Monday.
Well, we'll let them worry about that. Let's
Yes.
worry about us today, and I would move, Mr. Chairman, that we proceed with whatever the DDD becomes the date correction on page 4, that pages 13 and 14 be the correct dates that inserted at that location. The changes that were identified on page 7, the spelling of board and fixing the bold, and most importantly on page 13 with the strike of the and, change the semicolon to take it out altogether and have and critical care transport semicolon be inserted in. And with those amendments, I would move that we adopt the recommended plan.
One other item, Mr. Chairman,
We'll
before
go first, we need a second.
I was going to suggest something else to
To the motion.
to the action. I asked in the agenda that the board authorize me to make any non-substantive changes requested by NorCal EMS or the state agency just to facilitate.
I would include that as part of the motion, so that if there has to be some additional fine tuning, it doesn't require special meeting of the board.
Got a motion, Aaron second. Any discussion from the board, myself, and the public?
And I would just have to say, I hope this will be the last time I get to run it this year.
And the specific language of the motion is that this board is recommending NorCal adopt it as amended.
Yeah, that's the
And that's assented to by the secretary.
Okay.
Thank you.
Last chance for comment. Both lawyers happy?
That scares me.
They're kind of smiling. Okay, Madam Clerk, would you poll the board?
Supervisor Chapman?
Aye.
Supervisor Alba?
Aye.
Supervisor Hunter? Nay? Supervisor Powell?
All right. With that, I think that's the last of the business, Mr. Higgins, that we can,
God.
meeting adjourned.